Alright everybody, welcome to another Final Fantasy TCG card chat. Today our mindless task is opening up this big box of random Wave 1 non-foils. And today we're going to be discussing a question that many people have been asking me, which is Final Fantasy TCG dying? So this is a valid question. I don't want to say like Final Fantasy TCG is exploding or thriving or anything like that. Like I don't want to give anyone that impression. But I think a lot of people are concerned when buying these cards that they're kind of throwing their money away. Because for whatever reason, a lot of people think that FFTCG is dead or dying, and that if they buy any of these cards, they're basically losing a lot of money because they think the game won't exist in a year or two. And I think there's some validity to that, but I think that the fears are kind of excessive for what's actually going on. So there's actually a lot of people, even on like Reddit and stuff, that constantly ask us like, does anyone play this game? Is this game even like viable to invest in? And I think the answer is a resounding yes, but there are some stipulations to that. Whoa, there's a lot of cards in here. So I think the reason why people think that Final Fantasy TCG is dying and they're concerned about investing in it is primarily because if they're LGS frequenters, you don't actually see it being played in the LGSs all that often. And there are several reasons for that, and I'm going to go over them today. Sure. So for any of you guys who have actually played trading card games, one of the main problems with them is, I'm sure many of you know already, is that it is very expensive for what it actually is. I mean, look, these are just pieces of cardboard. You can, if you just bought the paper, this is probably like less than 50 cents of cardboard, if that. And if any of you guys have ever played Magic the Gathering or any of those kind of games, to build a competitive deck, it's actually hundreds of dollars, like, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Hundreds of dollars for cardboard to be able to have a deck that's actually viable in competitive play. Now, there are things called like pauper decks, but those are kind of more like for fun. Like they can be somewhat competitive, but for the most part, I don't think you'll ever win an actual competitive tournament against good players with a pauper deck. So it's really expensive, and a lot of times trading card players don't have that much money. So I want to discuss the topic of wallet sharing. Now, if you're a TCG player and you actually enjoy going to LGSs, playing games, socializing with people at the LGS store, then what do you want to do? You want to play the game that has the most likelihood of letting you compete with other people, right? And the problem is that at 99.9% of LGSs, if not 100% of them, that game is Magic the Gathering. If you need to spend hundreds of dollars on a deck, you're probably going to spend it on Magic the Gathering instead of Final Fantasy TCG. Because the thing is, except for like a select few locations where FFTCG has actually built up a good scene, and there are quite a few actually, for the most part, most LGSs have very consistent Magic the Gathering tournaments. They have pre-release events. They have like weekly, just like random tourneys. For Final Fantasy TCG, that doesn't happen so much. So if you want to get into the trading card playing scene, what do? You go to your local LGS, you see what events are available, and then you very quickly realize, oh, everyone's playing Magic the Gathering. Maybe I should just buy Magic the Gathering decks because I only have $100. I can only really afford to buy, I don't know, one booster box or a couple starter decks of a single game. Why wouldn't I buy Magic the Gathering instead of this Final Fantasy game that, it's cool and stuff, but no one seems to be playing it? And that's the problem. That's not just a problem for Final Fantasy TCG. That's the problem for pretty much every single new trading card game that has come out, whether it's Force of Will or Weiss Schwartz or whatever. And the thing is, all these new games, they almost can't compete with Magic the Gathering without some kind of IP. Like, the reason that, a lot of card games struggle competing against Magic the Gathering is because unless they have something more attractive to build than just new mechanics or something, no one's going to ever buy it. Like, and a lot of these card games are actually really good. They have good mechanics and things like that, but just they don't have the initial traction to kind of overcome the problem that is trading card game wallet sharing in Magic the Gathering. Now, let me tell you why Final Fantasy TCG kind of can get around that. It's because, again, the IP. Even though the card game, if it isn't that much different from Magic the Gathering or that much more, I don't know, attractive than Magic the Gathering, because realistically, most people will never even learn the mechanics of other card games because they'll never be willing to invest the $20 or $30 to get a few starter decks to bother learning if their friends aren't doing the same. So Final Fantasy TCG has the advantage because people will buy it just because it's Final Fantasy. They don't even care about the card game mechanics. They'll be like, oh crap, there's a card game that has like Cloud and whatever, Tifa and Renoa and all these other famous Final Fantasy characters in it. They'll be like, oh, I want to buy it just to have the cards. And I think that's the reason why Final Fantasy TCG has been doing well so far. And I say doing well, not doing amazing. But if you look at, a good thing to do is look at their press releases. And if you look at their press releases, you can kind of gauge what their sales are like. And honestly, it's been steady, but not tremendous growth. So if you follow, they kind of stopped doing releases for a while, but they've kind of been having these releases where every few months they'll say like 3.5 million booster packs sold, 5 million booster packs sold, 7 million booster packs sold. And based on that, if you kind of compare the amount of booster packs sold to the date of the press release, you can kind of extrapolate the demand for the product. And the problem is the past few months they haven't been doing that, but you can kind of calculate the growth on the early phase because in early 2017, 2018, they were doing a lot of these releases. You can kind of see how much of the product was selling on a monthly basis. So I think the main takeaway here is that Final Fantasy TCG is not blowing up in popularity, but it is exhibiting constant growth, which for a TCG is actually quite impressive because, like I said, Magic the Gathering is the juggernaut that no one seems to be able to beat. Magic the Gathering and Wizards of the Coast barely have to do anything to succeed because they already have most of the market share. They already have millions of players who invested probably billions of dollars into the product. And that's hard when you're a trading card player and you already have like several dozen competitive viable decks that you spent years and years building together. It's hard to just throw that all away and switch to a different TCG. And that's why I think I mentioned this in a previous video. I always considered Final Fantasy TCG to be more along the veins of Pokemon than Magic the Gathering. Because the thing that Final Fantasy TCG can do that Force of Will or all these other new IPs can't do is leverage the existing consumer base of an existing brand. For Final Fantasy TCG, I say a lot of the people buying these cards have no intention of ever playing the card game. And that's something that no one will ever buy a Force of Will deck just to have the cards. If you're buying a Force of Will deck, you probably want to play it. That is not the case for FFTCG. I know so many people buying these cards who live in the middle of nowhere, don't have any nearby LGSs, and not only have no intention of playing the card game, they couldn't play it if they wanted to, which is why, again, I was so mad about how Square Enix screwed up with the digital card game. They really needed to make a digital version of this to kind of build out this brand and kind of blow up the popularity. But like I said, with my website, with these videos, I see a lot of things that you guys can't see. I get at least a dozen emails a day now from people asking about, collecting Final Fantasy TCG cards, how to get the best prices, where to find Wave 1 cards, because again, a lot of Final Fantasy fans are kind of collectors at heart. they love collecting, and they played the video games. They spent hours and hours trying to get the ultimate weapons and special summons and whatever, like monster spells, blah, blah, blah. So collecting is nothing new to them. They just have this OCD mindset where they need to own everything related to Final Fantasy. And I know that because obviously I'm one of those people. I have spent a ton of time just collecting every single card there is possible in Final Fantasy TCG. And when I was done with that, I started buying duplicates of all the ones I considered rare. I mean, these aren't even that rare. They're non-foils, but they are all wave 1. So I thought that was kind of cool. So again, I think there's going to be a huge growing market for Final Fantasy collectibles. And I think a really cool thing to note is that even though FFTCG is a much smaller game than Magic the Gathering, a much smaller game than Pokemon, if you look at the card prices, in general, FFTCG cards command a higher premium than all modern Magic the Gathering cards or Pokemon cards. I mean, you could open an Opus 5 booster box. If you pull a foil wall, you have like more expected value out of that than most Magic the Gathering or Pokemon sets, with the exception of like Ultimate Masters. But again, Ultimate Masters is like a $250, $350 box, so it's not really a fair comparison. But for any of the normal like $80 Magic the Gathering booster boxes, a lot of the Final Fantasy boxes have a higher expected value, and I think that's really cool and kind of speaks to how many people are trying to get into this card game and are trying to collect the cards. Because I want to emphasize that for this card game, I think that, at least for the foreseeable future, that 70 to 80% of the sales is going to be not from the players, but from the collectors. And I think that's kind of unique to FFTCG. In other games like Pokemon, where they have an existing brand that they're trying to leverage. Again, I want to talk about Pokemon. I said before, a lot of people own Pokemon cards, and how many of them really know how to actually play the game? So think about it, like, if you're a viewer, do you own Pokemon cards from when you were a little kid? And you might still have them in your parents' house in a basement in an old binder with scratches and piss and dog poop on it. But you might have them, right? Have you ever played the game? If I whipped out a Pokemon deck and said, hey, if you play me and beat me, I'll give you $1 million, would you have any idea how to play it at all? Like, I have no idea. I remember they had like the energy things and whatever, but I probably had like, I don't know, like 200 or 300 Pokemon cards when I was a kid. I have no idea how to play the game. I could still play Magic the Gathering. I mean, I'm sure there's like new mechanics and stuff in the past 5-10 years where I would have no idea what it means. But the typical like mana tapping and phases and stuff, like I played Magic the Gathering, so I'd be able to play. If you gave me a deck of Magic cards, I'd be able to play you. But that's not the case for Pokemon. And the funny thing is, Pokemon might have more card sales in total sales than Magic the Gathering does. I think if you look at YouTube channels, there are like Pokemon channels with like, I don't know, like 1 million subscribers. As far as I know, I don't think any Magic the Gathering YouTube channel has that. Like even the big ones like Talarian and Channel Fireball or whatever. But Pokemon just has such a strong brand that there are so many people buying the cards even though they have no intention of ever playing the game. And I think that's going to be the same thing for Final Fantasy TCG. I think a lot of people are going to want to own cards that say Barret or whatever, like what are the kind of Gilgamesh, maybe not so much. But I think a lot of people want these cards even though they don't know how to play the game. They might never want to know how to play the game. But there's just so many collectors out there who just want to keep binders of this stuff hidden away in their closet to look at for their pleasure because they grew up playing Final Fantasy and they love the brand, myself included. I mean, I'm a little different because I actually want to play the card game and have actually played at an LGS a handful of times. But the problem is, it's just too much of a pain in the ass. Like, having to get in my car, drive an hour, and then go to an LGS and there might be no one playing, it's really a pain in the ass, which is why I was so upset when I found out that the digital card game is not about actually Final Fantasy TCG. Because this card game has so much potential. Square Enix can do so much with this. I mean, it was successful in Japan. On launch, it was exploding. And then because Square Enix screwed up on the marketing, the game's growth kind of started to fizzle out and die down. And now we've kind of been in this holding phase where FFTCG is enjoying this steady but continuous growth, but it hasn't really exploded the way I think it could. So anyways, I know that was kind of a rant, but the point is, no, I don't think Final Fantasy TCG is dying. I think a lot of people think it's dying because the LGS scene is not as active as it is for other card games. But if you've ever actually gone to an LGS, that's almost always the case because Magic the Gathering is such a juggernaut, and because not all these players are freaking millionaires. They can't afford to buy 10 booster boxes of Force of Will, Final Fantasy TCG, Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, and all these other card games out there. They have to pick one if they're kind of affluent, maybe 2, 3 at most. And really, because it's so hard to get the good cards in any game, to really be competitive in any single game, you have to focus on one and invest your money into one. Because look at Magic the Gathering. You want like a play set of like a really good Mythic. It might run you like $100. You're not going to spend that kind of money for every single card game out there. And the problem is, if you want to actually play people, be competitive at the pre-release events, the tourneys, whatever it is, you're going to invest most of your money into the game that has the most ability to let you play with other people. But the thing is, don't let that fool you because, again, the LGS scene might not be as active for Final Fantasy TCG, but like Pokemon, a lot of the buyers for FFTCG are not players at all. They're collectors. For MTG, the collector's market is much smaller than something like Final Fantasy TCG or Pokemon. It's kind of been growing mostly because of investors who are really just buying cards to hold on to them and make money. But most of those people are buying ABU cards who are not really tournament legal anyway, so again, you would never see them. But the thing is, no, Final Fantasy TCG is not dying. If you want to kind of prove that, look at the Square press releases to kind of see how many booster packs are being sold. And the biggest indication is that growth is steady. It's retaining a lot of its existing players based on the packs sold, but the growth is not meteoric or anything. They're not getting like 50% new players every year. It seems to be kind of like a steady 1 to 2 million every set, something along those lines. But it's not dying. It might die in a couple of years. Who knows? I guess we'll know if they discontinue the product. But for right now, for everyone asking me, is FFTCG dying? The answer is no. It's doing fine right now. It's not crushing Magic the Gathering or anything. And guess what? It never will. But it's built out, it's carved out a nice little niche for itself. So if you want to buy the cards, don't worry so much about the card game dying. At minimum, if you start getting real fears about it, you would have at least 2 or 3 years to sell out your stock if you really even cared about the money before that happens. Or just keep the cards forever because it's a brand you like, and you should just kind of like the cards. Like, who doesn't love this guy? The angry black man with a gun on his arm. Anyways, that's my card chat rant of the day. I hope that was interesting to some of you guys, probably not. But if you want to see more videos like this, just leave a comment in the section below, and have a great day, guys. Take care.